Yeah, really good. All right, so let's do a deck tech for YouTube, shall we? Okay. Let's see. Yeah, all right. So let's do this deck tech. Welcome back, guys, to a Couch Jockey deck tech. This is another historic deck, post-alchemy. This is Artifact Control. Blue-white Artifact Control. And right now, with the current list, with the current build, we have a 77% win rate. We have just won 5 consecutive matches in Mythic with this. We haven't lost a match in 5 matches. So it's extremely strong now. I went through a lot of versions, a lot of iterations of this, and many of them were pretty bad. Like, I was trying to use Whir of Invention earlier, and once I cut Whir of Invention and Archmage Charm, getting rid of the triple blues, suddenly the deck just suddenly became so much better. But the other big addition is the Alchemy card, Slayer's Bounty. Like, this is what the deck's really all about, is Slayer's Bounty. So you probably read Slayer's Bounty and thought, this seems cool, but I'm not sure how to use it. This is the deck that wants it. I've tried a lot of decks with that, and this is definitely the deck that wants it. This is a control deck that wants every single thing that Slayer's Bounty wants to give you. Every single thing Slayer's Bounty gives you is pretty much a piece of removal. So you would think that a lot of these cards are no good in a control matchup, right, that you can get from Slayer's Bounty. But that is not the case. Okay, so it's obviously possible to brick. But if you're in a creature matchup, then you're basically never going to brick because everything in here removes a creature pretty much. Like, every time you look at a group of 3, you're going to see something that kills a creature. So in the control matchups, what you're really looking for is cards like... so let's see here. So Raise the Alarm is great. It gives you more threats in the control matchup. Totally legitimate pick here. I've definitely gotten this in the control matchup just to give yourself more business on the table. Very strong. Another thing that's very good in the control matchup, the best card is Bound in Gold. Bound in Gold is the best thing you can take off of this. It's really, really interesting because it's enchant permanent, which means it turns off man lands, it turns off planeswalkers, it turns off activating artifacts. It does everything. It just basically is like that permanent doesn't do anything anymore. It's not so good against triggered abilities, but this is definitely the most powerful card that you can get out of the Slayer's Bounty. So there's some other weird kind of choices that are decent. Like, Bring to Trial is pretty weak. It's on the weaker side. Glass Casket's amazing because your deck is an artifact deck anyway. Reprobation, fine. It's basically just, it's kind of cool because the creature loses all abilities. So this is good against creatures with triggers. Collar the Culprit, this is only good because it's an instant, right? So, like, there's some moments where, like, let's say they activate a man land, right? Like, Cave of the Frost Dragon or something, you can just instant speed kill that. So that's pretty handy. So Compulsory Rest is like a bad pacifism. Expel is good, same thing. You could kill a man land with this. You could kill all kinds of things you want. And so, like, you can wait for them to attack and then sacrifice a clue, find Expel, and then expel something. So that's pretty decent. Fairgrounds Warden is actually good. It's good in the control matchup because it's a creature. So once again, it's another threat. It's just putting something in your hand that you can play out on the table and have board presence and what have you. Very good against enemy creature tokens, right? Like a big Shark Typhoon cycle, because that thing's never coming back. Iron Verdict, I think, is one of the worst ones. It's very bad. Luminous Bonds, just a pacifism. Seal Away I like. I really like this one because it's instant speed removal. So you can just wait for them to attack, and it has flash. I really like this one. It's really strong. One thing I like about this deck is, like, there's no way that they can adequately protect themselves from all the different ways in which you remove. So, for instance, if you're playing against Indomitable Creativity, which I've done several times on this ladder, you know, they'll name, like, instants and sorceries for their Sarah emissaries. And then you could just, like, okay, I'll seal it away because that's an enchantment. You know, it's kind of a cool little thing. Okay, and then we have the actual bounty agent herself. So I very rarely pick up bounty agent, but you could. I mean, a 2/2 vigilance is totally fine. One of the better threats that you can pick up off of this. But also, if it is established on the table, they need to deal with this before they can play something like, you know, Luris, you know, or something. Before they could play maybe Celestus, because you could blow that up. Or, you know, you could even play it after they play a Meat Hook Massacre, and you could blow up the Meat Hook Massacre with it. It's really not bad. I think it's fine. But once again, like, a lot of the cards you're going to get off of Slayer's Bounty are relatively low impact, but that doesn't matter as long as they're interacting with the board, because you're drawing a card from the clue and getting an extra card. So every single clue you have is worth 2 cards. Every single clue you have is like a divination for 2. So it's very, very strong in a control shell that wants the card advantage. Okay, so let's break down the whole deck. 4 portable holes. Best removal in the deck. I mean, you are hitting everything from Esper Sentinel to Thalia to Trail of Crumbs to just anything. I mean, it's a search for Azcanta. Like, this is just, I think, one of the best removals in the entire format. I think Portable Hole is completely insane. I don't in a deck that's based around artifacts, you definitely are going all in on this card. You want all of them. Thraben Inspector. So this is to give yourself more clues for Slayer's Bounty, but also it controls the early game pretty well. Like, it plays into Esper Sentinel very well and makes you able to block chump blocks. I mean, the big reason to play it is the clue, but it also dodges Sentinel and Thalia, so that makes it pretty good. I mean, 2 of these makes it so they can't attack with Thalia. It's amazing how much board control 1/2 stat line has in a control deck, right? Like, it's different when you're playing like a creature deck, because then it's just like comparing your creatures to theirs. But when you have so many spot removals and sweepers and stuff in your deck, just playing out 1/2s early game just buys you infinite time. It's amazing. So Grafdigger's Cage is in the main. This is one of the reasons why the deck is good. This is one of the reasons why the deck is competitive. I was running 3 Grafdigger's Cage in the main, and I was never unhappy with it. So one thing about this deck is that you want to be able to proactively play out artifacts starting on turn 1. You just want to play them out to power things like Metallic Rebuke, Reverse Engineer, and eventually Rise and Shine. Eventually. So basically, you're just trying to put as many artifact permanents on the table as you can, as quickly as you can, to activate all of your artifact synergies, your Rebukes, and your Reverse Engineers. Soul Guide Lantern is basically the 3rd Grafdigger's Cage slot, but there's certain matchups like Mizzix's Mastery where you'd rather have a Soul Guide Lantern because you need to just clean out their graveyard when they try to go off. Grafdigger's Cage doesn't stop Mizzix's Mastery at all, so that's kind of a concession to that particular matchup, just to give you some kind of tools for it. So 2 Glass Caskets, just more supplemental removal, deals with things like Luris and Scurry Oak and things like that cost 3 that are problematic. Also, the Angel, the 2/4 Angel, you want to be able to remove that. So this is the actual kill of the deck. This doesn't really cost 2 in here. This actually costs 6. So first of all, this actually costs 2, and this costs 6. That's really the curve, realistically. So. Yeah, so Rise and Shine, only in an absolute emergency would you ever do this for 2. You would only do it if you're facing an aggro deck and you need presence on the board. Because honestly, making a 4/4 against an aggro deck is pretty difficult for them to remove if they're playing red, right? It's very rare that they're going to just like, I have a 4 damage spell. Like, in aggro decks, they tend to have 2 to 3 damage with their removal spells. So in game 1, playing out a 4/4 blocker with this, turning your Grafdigger's Cage into a blocker, or your Slayer's Bounty into a blocker, very legitimate play. But other than that, like, that's very rare. Usually all you're doing is you're just trying to get up to a critical mass of artifacts, sweeping the board to make it clear, and then overloading this and killing them instantly. This is ridiculously powerful, the overload, especially if all of your artifacts are cheap. Like, you end up in positions in this deck where you're simply just counting your artifacts to see if they die. 5 artifacts is 20 damage, 6 is 24, 7 is 28. So oftentimes you end up in positions where they have 3 blockers and it doesn't matter. Like, you're hitting them for 28 anyway. So Rise and Shine, wow, what a card. So strong. Ridiculously good. So one thing I have noticed is that Slayer's Bounty actually synergizes with the Rise and Shine plan in a big way. And so does Sorcerer's Spyglass. But we'll talk about that in a second. Anything that allows you to take a look at their hand to see what they're up to will give you a clear plan for how long you need to wait before you Rise and Shine. If you have no information, you pretty much have to wait for a tap out, or, depending on the colors, if they have 1 or 2 mana, you can usually do it without fear of getting disrupted. But man, looking at their hand in any capacity is so strong with this deck. Now, it almost makes me want to play black, but I don't think you really can. given the way the deck works, I mean, the thing is, I don't really want to cut any of this for black cards, is what it comes down to, right? And so, yeah, that is what it is. But, okay, moving right along, Investigator's Journal. Now, this is a new card, right? And the thing about this card that's really interesting is it basically does what Maze Mind Tome does. It comes into play with a number of counters equal to the number of creatures any player controls. So it doesn't combine them. If someone has 2 and you have 1, then it comes in with 2. If someone has 3 and you have 2, then it comes in with 3. So it always comes in with the number that's equal to the largest number. But why are we playing this and not Maze Mind Tome? The reason is it's a clue. This artifact is a clue. It is so broken with Slayer's Bounty that this is a clue, right? So basically what this is like much better than Maze Mind Tome. Like if you play this for 2 with 2 counters on it, which you can supply yourself by playing out Thraben Inspectors, then you draw a card, and then sack it and draw 2. So it's 4 cards in the amount of time it would have taken Maze Mind Tome in like 1 turn less than the amount of time it would have taken Maze Mind Tome to deliver. So it's just great because it's a clue. Mind Stone, just to give you a little bit of mana, also more like a lot of things in this deck are flexible in terms of card draw, right? There's lots and lots of things in this deck that are just like, okay, you could play this out the way that it works, or you could just cycle it. And that's pretty important when you're trying to find your 2 Rise and Shines, like one of them toward the late game. But also just in general, control decks tend to benefit a lot from cycling through their deck very quickly so that they can get to the meaningful cards, right? If you need a Wrath, you've got a Wrath. If you need a counter, and so on. You know, you have the answers. It's trying to find the answers. Sorcerer's Spyglass. This used to be a Pithing Needle in the main deck, but the ability, like I said before, the power of being able to look at their hand is so good. But I don't think playing more than 1 is ever good because there's some decks where you basically Pithing Needle effects or Sorcerer's Spyglass effects just don't do anything, right? Like against Mizzix Mastery is a great example. There's literally nothing that you could name here except for maybe Magma Opus, and like all that would do is prevent them from putting it in the graveyard and getting a treasure, which they usually have done by the time you play this anyway, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty rare that there's literally nothing to name, but there's usually, in some matchups, there's stuff to name that just doesn't matter for the game, right? Like mono green aggro, for instance, what you might name the castle, the green castle, but they don't really care, do they? You know, it's just kind of one of those things. Okay, so Reverse Engineer. The sort of backbone of the deck is Reverse Engineer. The reason why this deck beats control decks is because your card advantage is better than most control decks. What most control decks in this format are trying to do is establish a card advantage engine, right? Where they're trying to like put down like a Teferi, or they're trying to put down, you know, they're trying to get a Search for Azcanta activated, or they're trying to, you know, get up to high mana so they can play broken cards like Hullbreaker Horrors, or they're trying to cast spells like, what's it called? Discover the Formula. So this is like Discover the Formula in the sense that you draw 3, except it costs 2 mana. In your deck, it always costs 2 mana. Very rare that it costs more than 2 mana in this deck. So 3 cards for 2 mana, I mean, you can't argue with the numbers. It's just insane, right? Absolutely insane. So I think if your deck can run it, Reverse Engineer is the best card draw spell in the format. Similarly, the best counter spell in the format is Metallic Rebuke, if your deck can do it, right? So it's something that I discovered a lot when I was messing around with Affinity, was that Affinity is a deck that can play both of these and wants to play both of these because they're so strong. But what I realized is that both of these would be really good in a control shell. The hard part was how do we get artifacts that actually control this environment, that actually control Historic. And my realization was Grafdigger's Cage is insane. Even though a lot of people are switching from Collected Company to Zealous Inquisitor, it doesn't matter because there's still tons of decks like Green-Black Food, Is It Phoenix? Just there's so many decks that just cannot function with a Grafdigger's Cage in play or some kind of relevant graveyard hate in play. And so because of that, like if you're controlling their deck with 1 mana artifacts, and then because of those 1 mana artifacts, you're drawing 3 cards and you're countering their spells for 1 mana, I mean, it's broken. It's just broken. That's it. Like there's just, if the engine is online, and the engine comes online usually turn 2 in terms of Rebuke, like Rebuke coming up, like Shields coming up on turn 2, then it's just ridiculous. And so the missing piece to making a control shell work in Historic using all of these tools was honestly Slayer's Bounty. Slayer's Bounty was the missing piece, and we have it now. And so a 1-drop artifact that is a control card that wants to sit on the table, gains you card advantage, and deals with creatures. I mean, it's perfect. Okay, Celestis, kind of more of what I was saying before, allows you to cycle through, fixes mana curve, accelerates mana. It's basically the 3rd Mind Stone slot, right? I don't want to play more than one of these. I don't want too many things that cost 3, and I don't want too many legendaries, so that makes sense. Okay, sweepers, right? So we have 1 Day of Judgment and 2 Wrath of Gods. It doesn't matter, you know, the split doesn't matter here. If you're encountering just tons and tons of creatures all the time, you could run a 4th sweeper, but I have the 4th one on my sideboard, but I find that I often don't need 4 in the main because I have so many things that cycle through my deck that I, you know, usually because you're going to finish the game typically from turns 6 to turns 9, that you really only need like 1 sweeper, maybe 2 tops. And you end up with 2 quite often, even with just 3 in the deck. But this is just a stylistic choice. Okay, so the Karns. The Karns are relatively recent addition, and I love them. I'm not sure about the ratio. Like, we might actually want a 2nd Scion and only 1 creator. But obviously in game 1, having double creator in your main deck is very strong because it allows you to go get something that hoses them. You know, some kind of funky artifact that hoses them or whatever. Also, it gives you access to your other Grafdigger's Cage on the board, and your Pithing Needle, in case you need it, on the board. A little piece of removal and Glass Casket. If they're running a bunch of walkers, you could drop an Immortal Sun on them. There's a lot of matchups where I'll just run and grab Cosmos Elixir because it's so good now after the Alchemy correction that I just love to have it. It's one of my favorite cards. I think it's really, really good. Perilous Vault is really just for Enchantress. Just so you can blow up a 9 lives and they instantly lose. That's really what that's for. Meteor Golem is for, you know, a catch-all, and Platinum Angel because there's some decks that can't beat it, right? So yeah, I'm pretty happy with this wish board basically for artifacts. I think that it's adequate for now. I'm pretty happy with it. So yeah, so I often end up shaving a Karn or cutting Karn completely after board and just putting in more things that I want to draw. Like if they're playing a graveyard heavy deck, I'll cut both Karns, put in both of these, you know, because it's like I want my deck to be more tuned against them. And then Rise and Shine finally is, of course, the kill card. Now, the mana base is better than it used to be. So I'm running 3 irrigated farms. So it's, okay, so we got 1 basic plains, 3 basic islands, 2 deserted beach, which I think is the right number, 2 glacial fortress, which I also think is the right number, 4 hallowed fountains because you need them, 4 hidden gate pathways. So the important thing is that you're trying to decrease the amount of things that come into play tapped because you are playing 3 irrigated farmlands, right? I think playing 3 irrigated farmlands is correct because you need to be able to cycle. Like, once you get to 6-7 mana, you just don't need mana anymore, really. Like, not after you have a bunch of Mind Stones and Celestis and all that in play. You just don't need mana anymore in this deck. Some control decks want to just play all the way out to, like, 10 mana. This one does not. Like, you want to hit that certain threshold and then cycle away the rest so that you can make sure that you have enough, like, incremental business against what they're up to. You often end up with extra mana in your hand anyway because you're casting a bunch of reverse engineers. So it's important to be able to be flexible with the land. So 1 Inventor's Fair, love it. One of my absolute favorite cards. And I think that this, in Historic, I think this is really insane. I mean, once again, it gives you access to any of your utility artifacts that, you know, maybe beat them like as a sideboard, afterboard, or even your pre-boarded stuff. Spire of Industry just fixes the curve a little bit. It's pretty much always turned on. It's basically your 5th Hallowed Fountain slot. And 1 Treasure Vault. Now, I have gone up and down on how many are supposed to be in the deck, and I'm convinced that 1 is maximum. I don't think you want any more than 1, because playing colorless lands in this deck are pretty bad. Like, it's not the type of artifact deck that can afford to just play a bunch of colorless sources. It needs all its sources to have color. So this one, it's really in there for combo. Like, I've had plenty of games where I was forced, basically, to crack all of my clues and crack all of my Mind Stones and basically remove all of my own artifacts off the table as the game went on. And then I realized there was no way I was going to be able to kill them with Rise and Shine, so what I did was, you know, very late game, I would activate Treasure Vault to put like 4 or 5 treasures into play, and then Rise and Shine them the following turn and kill them with the treasure token. So it's actually a way to just claw your way back in and combo them, kill them, and it's even less expected. It's even harder to read that that's coming. So yeah, love that part. All right, so let's talk about the sideboard here. So we've got an extra pithing needle, an extra Grafdigger's Cage, glass casket for supplemental removal. Test of Talents, I think, is really good. It's really good in a deck like this one, where what's going to happen after sideboard is, let's say you're playing against a blue-red opponent. They're going to put in some number of Prismari commands if they don't have them already, and maybe some number of Abrades. They're going to put in things that are good against you. They're good against your artifacts. So Test of Talents allows you to de-sideboard them, right? If they Prismari command, you just Test of Talents to de-sideboard them. Take all of their Prismari commands out, right? I think this is insane for that reason. If a deck presents a weakness, like having a lot of artifacts, you want Test of Talents to be able to take that away from them once again. I think it's really, really good. Dovin's Veto, best blue. We're back. So Mystical Dispute, once again, it's really, really good. Just solid anti-blue counter. Immortal Sun is there just for a wish target for Karn. Disdainful Stroke is the latest addition to the sideboard. It's really just for control mirrors, and I think it's very good for that. A 4th Wrath on the board, very good. So what about the weapon that gets +1 for each artifact with living weapon? So we're not playing Nettle Cyst because we are just not that kind of deck. So the thing about Nettle Cyst is you could have it as a wish target, but more often than not, all you need to do is draw your Rise and Shine and you just win. There's plenty of situations where Nettle Cyst is not good enough, because Nettle Cyst, like in game 1 in particular, they will have blockers. You know, they can literally just chump block it. The reason why Nettle Cyst is good in Affinity is because they have a bunch of threats. They're overwhelming you. They have tons of stuff on the board, and they have flying stuff they can equip with Nettle Cyst. Our deck doesn't really have any of that, so Nettle Cyst feels kind of naked in our deck. So we're a control deck. We're not an aggro deck at all, basically. We're a control deck with a combo kill, basically. So Ashiok's Erasure is a really interesting card. This is a card that it took me a while to come around to realizing that it was needed. The big reason that it's needed is you expect either like post-board, you expect some decks to put in some number of Hullbreaker Horrors, Chandra, Big Chandra, the 6-mana Chandra, uncounterable giant spells, Thought Distortion, things like that. You need defense against that stuff, and I think Divide by Zero is not good. So Ashiok's Erasure is a way to deal with uncounterable stuff because it just exiles it. But more than that, it's incredibly good against combo. You can play it on their Indomitable Creativity. You can play it on their Mizzix Mastery. You can play it on a lot of the cards that they're trying to ramp up to, and then they just can't go off anymore. So really, really strong. I just put it in as a counterspell against anything that's like control-y or combo-y. I think it's really, really good for that. Cosmos Elixir is quickly becoming one of my favorite Alchemy adjusted cards. So yeah, I'll talk about that in a second, actually. Townic, 1 second. So Cosmos Elixir, since it's been readjusted from Alchemy, it's so good now. It scries every turn, gains you 2 life. Like, if you're behind in life, this is so bananas. Like, I just love it. And then if you're ahead, then you're drawing cards every turn. So it's really no downside to this. I just think it's fantastic. It's good in most matchups. So, like, if you are activating Karn to go find something and you don't know what to get, like you're not sure, just grab Cosmos Elixir. That's really what it's there for. Just grab it. It's good in most situations. Perilous Vault is really there for Enchantress to blow up 9 lives. So Thought Monitor, I actually get this fairly often. It's just a way to activate Karn and just go draw some cards for 1 mana. There's plenty of situations where you just go grab it. Thought Monitor costs 1, play it, draw some cards. Simple as that. Meteor Golem, if they have a big permanent, like something like Shark Typhoon on the table, you want this Meteor Golem on your sideboard. And then Platinum Angel, it's just there to make sure, like, there's some matchups out there who literally cannot beat a Platinum Angel, but I actually don't go get this card very often. I think this could be something else on the sideboard, but it's really just there because it's a wish board, and why not, right? That's sort of the idea. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So a few notables that we are not playing, right? So we are not playing Dance of the Manse. I used to play Dance of the Manse, and I think Dance of the Manse is actually slightly better in this version than it was in older versions of the deck. Dance of the Manse is good if you have like a bunch of, obviously, Mind Stones, Investigators, Journals, Slayers, Bounties. These things actually hit the yard on their own, right? Even Soul Guide Lantern, right? They hit the yard on their own. So the other thing is that if you have a Grafdigger's Cage in play, it doesn't stop Dance of the Manse. Dance of the Manse still works. So you can still abuse your graveyard, but your opponent can't. But at the end of the day, I have played with Dance of the Manse enough to know that it's just too slow. It's just too slow, it's too clunky, and it's not impactful enough. However, you could, if you wanted to, cut this Platinum Angel for a Dance of the Manse. I think that is a completely legitimate thing to do after sideboard, not pre-board. The reason why is that I think it becomes powerful once your opponent is blowing up your artifacts. So in the red matchup, they put in Prismari Command and a Braid, maybe Culligan's Command, something. They put in stuff to blow up artifacts, Outland Liberator, whatever, right? After board, Dance of the Manse becomes good. Because they're going to blow up things like Portable Holes, Glass Caskets, they're going to blow up the stuff that's removal. And so if you bring back a whole ton of removal in one turn after board, that's really good. But game one, I think it's total garbage. I don't think you want it, right? I just don't. Like, if you think about it, like, okay, so let's say that you're playing it in the main deck or something just to bring back Journals, Mind Stones, Soul Guide Lantern, Slayer's Bounties, right? Like, you spend a ton of mana to put all this crap into play. Like all these little artifacts in play. And then you have to spend way more mana just to draw and capitalize on them. If you're getting pressured, you're just dead. There's nothing you can do about it, right? You're just actually dead in that position. So I think in slower mid-range to control matches, sure, you could board it in. I think that would be totally fine. It just kind of depends on how you want to build it. But I do think there's some things about this that I would not change, right? I would not change the number of Slayer's Bounties. I think 4 is too many. 3 is the perfect number. I would always play 4 Reverse Engineers, always play 4 Metallic Rebukes. And the 2 Rise and Shine is also the right number here, for sure. 1, if it gets countered, you're just dead. And 2 gives you some flexibility, like you could play 1 targeting one thing if you need to in the early game, and then in the late game you could cast it. Honestly, Rise and Shine is one of the worst cards to get in your opening hand. It's very rare that you want this in your opening hand. You want it to naturally come into your hand, so that's why you can never play more than 2. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I think that sums it up. Any other notables we're not playing? I guess one thing I should mention is that the reason why we're not playing any Thought Monitors in the main is that we are running Sweepers. And Thought Monitor is much better in a deck that wants a creature on board with evasion. It wants a flyer, right? I mean, obviously it's a very great card, but we're running 4 Reverse Engineers. We have tons of stuff that cycles. We don't really need the raw card advantage a lot of the time. What we really need is just to survive the early turns. And honestly, Thought Monitor does not do that. Thought Monitor does not help you survive the early turns. So it's sort of a concession to that realization. But yeah, that pretty much sums up the deck tech. So thanks everyone for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check me out on Twitch. I am Couch Jockey. I'm sorry, I'm Twitch TV/Couch Jockey. So thanks everybody.